Very few pathways create 10x. And that's what I want to jump into today. 10x, man, it seems crazy to think about setting a 10x goal, right? Many of you may have thought through that or been motivated or, to do that at some point. And then maybe you get pushed back, right? From friends, family, other people, in your network. They think you're crazy, right? For trying to do that. That has been me before. I'm going to talk about a little bit of that today. And actually I'm going to go through just a few highlights from a recent book. You've probably heard of it. I hope you have by now. And if not, I hope that you will listen or read this book soon. It is one that has challenged me in a big way. And it's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. I really enjoy a number of their books. I've actually did a few podcasts on Who Not How. That was one they wrote a year or two ago, or maybe longer. And man, a great read as well, which I would highly encourage. There's another one. Actually, they've done a few, but I would encourage you to look them up, and because these are they're very practical stuff, or they lay out some things that help you to actually implement some of these things as well, which I appreciate. But they make me think and think differently often, and so I enjoy that kind of reading. But that's what we're going to get into today on your daily Real Estate Syndication Show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Well, in the introduction, which I also encourage you not to skip, he dives into the life of Michelangelo and the hardships and the risks that Michelangelo had to take to get to the next level. And he 10x'd time and time and time again. I won't go through all that today, but I want you to go and listen to that or read it because it's encouraging. And I was sharing that with our family and my boys. I want them to just think that way, right? Even from a young age, and just talking through and what he did, Michelangelo, to 10x again and again and again. So, but getting on to chapter 1, 2, we'll go through a couple of them today. And again, this is 10x is easier than 2x. Man, think through that, even just that title for a minute, and how to implement that, because that is just completely against what we would typically think, right? But he says seemingly impossible goals are more practical than possible goals because impossible goals force you outside of your current level of knowledge and assumptions. I mean, that is such a big part of the book, just that one sentence. One way we have applied that, or I did early on, is the podcast, which you all know, doing 7 times what most other people are doing. And I was called crazy by a number of people that I respected and trusted. And it made me question, should I really do this? Should I do a 7-day a week? Is that just insanity? And I get more questions now, has it been worth it? And, if you look at the trajectory of our business, it should be pretty obvious it's been worth it. But it hasn't been easy, that's for sure. However, what it did early on is it made me think differently, right? I knew doing 7 days a week, there was no way that I was going to be able to do everything. And if I'd been doing a weekly show, I would have tried to have done everything, the show notes, the editing. I said, oh, you know what? I can save the money. I'll go get it done. And I guarantee you, I would have gotten so behind that we would have quit. And, but instead, since we 7x'd at the time, right? Or at least the number of podcasts, it made me think different. There was no way possible that I could do all those things. So I didn't even try. Right? I didn't try to learn how to do the show notes. I didn't try to learn how to edit the audio or video or whatever. I knew that I had to go find people to do that. There was no way around it. So it made me think differently from the very beginning, just in that regard whatsoever. And then the first deal that my business partner, Sam, and I did was a $20 million community. And we also had to think differently, right? To make that happen. That was a major step for us, at the time. And I think for most, right? To do that, your first syndication to be that big. And that seems crazy, right? To most, but that's 10xing. That's more than 10xing, right? Where most people are encouraging you to buy a single family home, right? To rent it out or maybe renovate it and then maybe get a duplex and then a few duplexes and a fourplex, right? We just skipped that and said, you know what, we're going to go after it and we're going to, create a much bigger goal here. And it made us think and do things differently. So Dan also says, very few pathways create 10x. With genuine reflection, a 10x target spotlights the few pathways, the high leverage strategies and relationships with extreme upside. So this was helpful for me to think through, right? And it becomes when you start thinking this way, and I have to remind myself every day, nearly of just to think this way, but it becomes a filter, right? And that's what I like about this thinking is that it becomes a filter when you can start to set that 10x goal, like. When something comes in your path, right? We all have shiny object syndrome. I feel like, it's a constant battle. I feel like as an entrepreneur, like, oh, I could go do that. I could go do that. But when you are thinking 10x, you can quickly use that as a filter to think, okay, is that going to help me get to 10x? Because if you're thinking 2x, a lot of these things could do that, right? A lot of things could help you 2x. You can just go work a lot harder and probably 2x. But it's not about working harder. It's about working easier. I mean, having easier, work, but more focused, right? And so 10x goals, and it just enables you to clearly identify the 20% of things and people in your life that are producing most of the results, and the 80% of things and people in your life that are holding you back. And so it becomes that filter that helps you think through that. Going for 2x growth means you can keep 80% of your existing clients' roles, behaviors, and mindsets. Only minor tweaks are needed. So you don't have to change a whole lot, right, to go 2x. But going 10x means you must eliminate the 80% of your existing clients' roles, behaviors, and mindset. 10x requires a full-scale transformation of yourself as well as everyone and everything around you. And that's Dan Sullivan or Benjamin Hardy there saying that you have to eliminate that 80% of all those things. And I struggle with that, right, in a big way. Obviously, have a number of friends that I'm not going to eliminate the friendships, right? I'm just not. But however, going back to the podcast example here, for me, think about I'd never really spoken into a mic before, and then started a daily podcast. And so it was a major jump for me. It was thinking 10x. It was pushing myself in a massive way out of my comfort zone. And even the thought of starting a podcast about real estate syndication and had never syndicated a deal, right? People thought I was crazy, right? I mean, it was just called crazy. So think about that, right? I couldn't care about what other people thought. I just had to jump in and do it. And so I agree with a lot of this. I don't agree with eliminating 80% of your current relationships, but I do understand what he means here. And so, I would agree with, shifting the focus, right? More on the 20% of your network and increasing that 20% in a big way, right? And constantly thinking that way, right? You're going to keep taking that 20%. And as it continues to grow, you're going to keep figuring out, okay, what's the 20% now, right? You may do this every year or every 6 months or every 3 months. You're thinking through, hey, what's the 80-20 here? What's the 80%? And we'll get into this that we're going to delegate, right? We're going to give to somebody else. So you have to be thinking that often. But you have to think about like 2x is linear, right? And just growing to continue growing, right? It requires a lot of effort, right? You're gonna work a lot harder often just to 2x, and it's just working harder, not smarter. Often, he says it is quantitatively focused, right? You're just doing more of what you're doing now, right? Without respect to quality, uniqueness, or transformation is what he says. So I like thinking about that. Like, what am I doing? That's 2x thinking, right? Versus 10x, which is non-linear, right? It's enormous growth does not require typically more effort often. Like the podcast did require a lot more effort from me. However, it could have required even more if I hadn't have built a team, if it hadn't have made me think differently, like we talked about, like I already mentioned. But it often requires less, but better, right? It's qualitatively focused is what he says. You've elevated your vision, your focus, such that you're now transforming the value and impact of what you do for increasingly specific people. So, you're thinking very different at this level, right? You're not thinking like you used to think. And that is such a hard part for me, I think for everybody, right? I have to, like I mentioned, I have to continually remind myself to think this way and to use it as a filter. And so every time you make a 10x jump, you do so by letting go of so many things that were in that 80%, right? And then going deeper into, it just a more concentrated 20%, right? The 20% that you are uniquely really good at, and then letting go of that 80%, and hiring those who's, right? Go back to who, not how. And I would encourage you to read that book or even look at the podcast that I did, just reviewing that book. But I couldn't recommend them enough to go through these books, but Benjamin Hardy and Dan Solomon. But you need to hire the who's, right? And that was what we did in the podcast. 7 versus 1. I knew I could not do it all. I had to hire people. So hired numerous team members, even within LifeBridge Capital. We've hired, many people who are, everybody, right? They either are when they're hired or they become better at their specific tasks than I am at doing their tasks. Where I used to do all those things, or Sam used to do all those things. It was pretty much split up between he and I for a long time, right? And then we start hiring people that are much better at, with specific skill sets or experience than we have, right? And that's how we've continued to grow. That's how we've just gotten better over and over. But every time you go 10x by letting go of the 80% and going all in on your desired 20%, you dramatically increase the quality and quantity of your freedoms as a person, which are time, money, relationships, and purpose. And I can look back and think, no doubt, that happened, in my life by thinking this way, by pushing in a way. And obviously I had not read this book at that time. I wasn't really thinking that way, but what I knew is I'd seen this work for different people, right? And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go do it. We're going to go make it happen. It was a mindset shift for myself, thinking I can make this happen versus being scared to go make it happen, right? Or backing down when other people thought I was crazy or say, don't do that, Whitney. You should never do a daily podcast. That's way too much effort. You're going to quit, right? You're going to, whatever, all those pushbacks that I received. And, and I would also mention that at that time, I had a mentor and I was Joe Fairless. He's a good friend of mine now. And, even then it was so crucial to have somebody in my life that was already thinking this way. And again, it was just the Lord providing somebody like that in my life. But I remember going to Joe at this time and thinking, and this is very early on, before we launched the podcast, and telling him about what these other people were saying, right? And again, these were 2 or 3 people that were highly respected in our industry that probably most all of you have heard of, and who said, Whitney, you're crazy. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so I talked to Joe about it, and Joe immediately said, well, that's why you have to do it, right? That's why you have to do it, because it's too much work for everybody else, right? And so it was a lot more work, but it wasn't 10xing my work as far as me trying to do all the parts of the podcast, right? It has been a ton of work. But back to the mentoring, it's I already had somebody, right, that was already thinking that way. And so that, if not for that, I may have backed off and thought, I shouldn't do that. I should listen to these people who care about me. They did. They were speaking into my life and trying to protect me. But I needed people who were already thinking at a much bigger scale, right? And Joe was that person at the time, and still is. He's a great mentor, still to this day, and friend. And so can't say enough good things about him. But I would say it's still a struggle, right? Even now, to just maintain that vision of how to 10x and again and again. And if you read that about Michelangelo, you'll see how he did that time and time and time again. But he had to take big risk. I would encourage you to listen to that. But it's so easy to get trapped in 2x thinking, right? It's so easy to do that. And often I'm telling people, they tell me, well, how can I get more done, Whitney? Or what am I going to do to scale? And I just ask them, well, who's on your team? Oftentimes they haven't hired their first assistant, right? They haven't hired the first person to start taking anything off their plate. And then they push back and say, well, it's just not going to work. I'm just going to have to, train them, and then they're going to quit. I'm going to train somebody else. And well, of course you are. Of course you are. But it's 2x thinking to think that you're going to continue doing everything. And so, yes, that's just one example, but I've had numerous assistants, right? And I have grown and as I've hired different assistants and trained them and whatnot, and right, they've gotten better every time, and they've got higher paid every time as well, right? But and actually, as we've grown, they're doing a lot more things for me, right? Of that 80%, they're doing more and more. And I have to continually, like I said, remind myself of this, to think that way and use that as a filter. So I hope you will do that today. I'm gonna stop this segment here, but I hope that you'll reach out, right? info@LifeBridge Capital. If you would like to hear specific people on the show, if you would like me to talk about specific things, or more things that we're doing internally, or whatever it may be. If you're a passive investor or whether you're active, I would love to hear from you and things that you would like to hear on the show that would be helpful and beneficial to you. Have a blessed day. Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.